Okay, you guys are going to love today's lecture because it's nice and short. All we're going to do is cover the basic process of stimulus and response in reference to your nervous system. Alright, so very simply put, a stimulus is the input into a system. Alright? And the response is the change that is resulted from that stimulus. So for example, I tap Johnny on the shoulder and Johnny turns to look at me. What's the stimulus in that situation? Well, what was put into that situation? The stimulus was me tapping Johnny on the shoulder. That was the input. Now what's the response? Well, what did Johnny do when he was tapped on the shoulder? He turned to look to see who was tapping him on the shoulder. Alright? And it's because of that stimulus, because of that touch, right? That sense of touch on the shoulder that caused him to respond, to turn and look. Another example. Alright? You're upstairs in your bedroom and your mom shouts up, "Hey, Betty! When do you want to eat dinner?" Alright, well the stimulus were those words that you heard. Mom's calling my name and asking me what I want for dinner. So your response, you shout back, "Fried chicken!" Alright, that's your response. You responded to that situation. You responded to that sense of sound. Hope that makes sense. Alright, now reflex is the simplest response to a stimulus you can have. It is a quick motor response. Motor meaning movement or muscular, right? So this is a little different. Now with your typical stimulus and response situation, a sensory neuron is triggered, right? It sends a message to an interneuron, your brain, whatever, processes it, and sends a message back to the motor neuron saying, do this because of this. Now a reflex is different. It skips that interneuron step. It goes straight from a sensory neuron to a motor neuron. Right? Now the best example I can think of as a reflex is when you go to the doctor's office, right? You get hit on the knee, your leg kicks. Right? It was quick. Didn't ever reach the brain, it just happened. Right. And that's why they call it a reflex test. It's testing to make sure that those things are happening like they're supposed to be, that your nerves are firing as they should. So now the last part of this process of stimulus and response is understanding the difference between receptors and effectors. And these very much relate back to the stimulus and the response. So I'm going to pull back that situation of Johnny. Remember when we were talking about stimulus and response a little bit ago? I tap Johnny on the shoulder, and Johnny turns to look at me. Now, the stimulus in that situation is me tapping Johnny on the shoulder. But what in Johnny's body actually receives that piece of information? Almost always. And I don't want to say always because there's always some kind of exception out there. But majority of the time, a receptor is going to be a sensory neuron. In this specific case, I'm tapping Johnny on the shoulder, so his sensory neurons of touch receive that message. They receive that stimuli, that sense of touch. Now again, his response was he turned to look at me. Well, again, usually a receptor is a sensory neuron. Typically a response, an effector is going to be a motor neuron. So again, back to Johnny, his response was that he turned his head to look at me. Well, that motor neuron, remember motor neurons connect to your muscles, caused him to turn his head to look. Now it doesn't always have to be what you think of as a muscular movement. Maybe Johnny didn't turn to look. Maybe Johnny decided to go, what? Well, he didn't turn. But to speak, do you not have to use muscles? Do you not have to lower your jaw, cause vibrations in your vocal cord? All of that has to happen. So receptor, sensory neuron, effector, motor neuron. And that's it for stimulus and response.